I'm telling you that if you don't get the safety and responsibility piece right, you'll run into not speed bumps, but brick walls.
I'm worried about people sleeping better at night saying AI is in charge, when there's nothing today that will replace human instinct.
The way to get people to trust AI is for AI to be trustworthy. Right? It's not the people's problem, it's the AI's problem.
Welcome to the Four Futures of AI. I'm Francis Rose. Across the federal government and state capitals, a single profound question is echoing. Will government shape AI's future, or will AI shape the government? To answer that, this four-part series brings to life a visionary framework developed by EY. They mapped out 4 distinct scenarios for the year 2030 to help public officials anticipate the coming waves of change. The desired outcome of this exercise isn't to predict the future perfectly with a crystal ball. It's about preparation and imagination. By exploring these futures, government leaders can build resilient strategies today to ensure they actively steer artificial intelligence toward the public good rather than just passively reacting to it. We've looked at growth, the steady path. We looked at transform, the scientific revolution. But there's a catch. What happens when the machine makes a mistake? What happens when an algorithm is compromised or deepfakes flood the zone and you can't find a human to fix it? Today, we look at the third future, constraint. In this scenario, the speed of innovation hits the brick wall of public opinion. This is the future where governments are forced to slam on the brakes to prioritize human control over raw speed.
I think what the constraint scenario teaches us is that trust is a strategic asset. Trust is something that is earned over a long time, years, decades, but can be completely destroyed in an instant.
I think the easiest way to describe the constraint scenario is to think about nuclear energy. We had a couple of really significant events that happened. Chernobyl is a big one that everyone can think about. They didn't define the value of nuclear energy, right? Those didn't change the opportunities that we had with regard to nuclear energy. But because we didn't have the safety measures in place to avoid those major events that had massive implications, there was a huge public backlash. There was a lack of trust for those infrastructure projects. And it set us back decades and decades of innovation on nuclear to the point where now we're really just seeing acceleration again.
So this scenario is sort of your classic regulatory scenario, right? So something bad happens and people don't like it. And so we build in regulations to try to stop it in the future.
You know, artificial intelligence has really taken over the public domain. Everyone knows what AI is. And if they don't know what AI is, they're actually subjected to it, whether you're streaming a movie or you're purchasing something online. That means because there's so much AI that is available in the commercial realm, that we're going to see the equal amount of AI that's available to governments. And so governments have to really think thoroughly through what are their values, norms, and assumptions around what this technology is going to do. I think there's an enticement because AI is so widely adopted right now for governments to want to just get the next bright and shiny object. But I'm here to say, I think that there should be some cautious deliberation around what it is that you're trying to solve before you actually jump in as a government and purchase or procure AI technologies.
There's going to be public backlash to some AI screw up, and nothing will happen. We see that again and again. There's public backlashes to social media. There's public backlashes to insecurities in databases. There's talk, there are articles, there might be hearings. Nothing happens. As long as the money doesn't want change, there won't be change. And very often, it doesn't matter whether you trust these AIs. They're going to be thrust upon you. Right? Right now, an AI is giving you turn-by-turn driving directions. That's the way it works. An AI is determining what you see in your social media feed. That's the way it works. You don't have a choice. You might not like it. You might not trust it. It might not be trustworthy, but you're being forced to use it.
So I think it's really important for us to go out into the country, for us as members of Congress and to the districts that we represent, and listen to the American people about, their hopes and optimism with respect to AI, but also the fears and concerns that they have, whether those fears and concerns are around the security of their data, the potential for job loss and significant, disruption to the economy. So I think it's really important that we listen to the American people.
The biggest risk is security. We manage a lot of data. Some of that data is very proprietary. Some of it's personal data. One of our greatest responsibilities is to protect the data of our citizens. So our biggest risk is making sure that that data is protected. What so many people don't realize when they work with AI is that when they put something into an AI platform that is just a general purpose AI platform, they are putting it basically out on the web. They're putting it into the models, and so other AI agents will be able to access some of that data. So we need to keep that from happening. So we're building those capabilities to be able to kind of build a fence around our data. So the biggest thing that we do is make sure that we keep that data secure.
So I think of a hacker as someone who subverts a set of rules. Normally think of this as computer code, right? Computer code is a bunch of rules, and a hacker will find something in it that doesn't work right, that has an unforeseen consequence, then uses that to their advantage. Right? That's what a hacker does. And you can imagine that same kind of mindset being applied to other systems. So the tax code, right? It's not computer code, but it's a bunch of algorithms, right? It has inputs and outputs. And that code is very complex, and it has vulnerabilities. We call them tax loopholes. It has exploits. We call them tax avoidance strategies. And it has black hat hackers looking for them. We call them accountants and tax attorneys. And you can really think about any systems of rules that way. So now you can imagine an AI doing the same thing. We already have a lot of research in AI finding vulnerabilities in code, but you can imagine an AI finding vulnerabilities in the tax code. Or you feed it the entire nation's tax code, all the states' tax code, maybe the world's tax codes. And in theory, at least, it can find new vulnerabilities, new tax loopholes.
People have been trying to rob banks since the first gold was put in a goldsmith and lent out for purposes. Right? And even today, you're only going to have two results from a bank robbery. They're either going to be captured or they're going to be killed. But people still rob banks, right? It's still a threat that's out there, even though we basically solved it to some extent and made it as difficult as possible. But people still desire to do that. Is the use of AI in this space just another tool that a bad actor may be able to try to use to be able to get to a different place? And so is it something we're going to have to overcome? Yes. Something we have to worry about? Of course. How do we work to be able to identify where those potential uses are, nefarious uses are, and then work to be able to make sure we can identify them? So blindly being reliant upon AI as your whole defense doesn't help.
I also think we need to do a better job of unique threats at specific industries. Sorry, I fall into royal we, but the intelligence community needs to do a better job of informing in a way that makes it actionable. Things like supply chain, I think, have finally seen their day, right? Probably later than they should have. The proliferation of non-US based 5G infrastructure. And if they're white labeled and made in China, 70% of them have additional functionality than they were supposed to have. That's a problem, right? But industry has to get around that problem.
I think the biggest risk that I see in AI is really the lack of governance. So what happens a lot of times is firms rely so much upon AI and be able to think about it could solve the problem, but understanding it's only a tool. And if you're too reliant upon any tool,
you're going to probably fail at the end of the day because there's no counterbalance to it. So the more in which you're actually looking at it, understanding the limitations, and then being able to build into where those limitations are to be able to make sure they don't overtake what you're trying to accomplish.
The challenge for Congress is always this. You know, governing bodies operate in a very deliberative way, which is the way they're supposed to operate. The challenge with that is also a very slow process. The challenge with this is the technology is a very fast-moving process, and the legislative process is a slow, deliberative process. So the challenge for us is how do we keep up with where the technology is going to make sure the public policy and the things we're doing to create the guardrails and the necessary framework for that keeps up with where the technology is going.
We're at this sort of Wild West moment in AI with adoption of the technology. We're not quite sure what's coming next. We're trying to keep an ear to the ground as best we can. And we know that there's also a crisis of trust in government. To ensure that we have a good understanding of what is low risk and what is high risk. And we define that in a lot of depth. So in our AI policy and in a set of subsequent guidance that operationalizes that policy, we go into depth into what constitutes a low risk use case versus a medium risk use case versus a high risk use case versus a non-permissible use case. And if it is a low risk use case, our approach is go forth and conquer. Go through this process. There is some initial sort of collaboration done between my team and other teams and the teams that are deploying those technologies. Now, if it's a high-risk use case, we need to pump the brakes a bit and spend significantly more time doing due diligence, understanding what the risks are.
Whenever we're encountering a new technology, whether it's AI or previous areas of technology, I think many people initially focus on the harms. They focus on what they're afraid of. And instead, perhaps we need to think more about the real potential, the real beneficial possibilities. What we want to see is a light touch framework, a framework that allows new technologies to evolve and develop and better serve our needs.
The fun part about the governance for us right now is that it really focuses on outcome-based things. How can we enable better outcomes? And it feels less like a restrictor and more like a guide to doing the thing that gives you the best result.
I think the governance problems are there. Things like federal acquisition regulation gets blamed a lot. Things like the ATO certification accreditation process. Those are the kinds of things that actually AI could be and should be applied to. And that would speed those up as well. But you're changing a culture at that point.
The people in procurement and public sector are scrambling a bit because there are new risks. They have vendors proposing AI tools that no one can guarantee exactly how it behaves. Like, no one. How does a contracting officer spending taxpayer dollars with a responsibility to buy the safest, most dependable product, procure something that isn't completely understood yet? That tool is going to go after data that other tools didn't go after. So there's risk. There are risks that I think the contracting and GCO community are still catching up with.
Vendor locking can get you if you're not paying attention. I think how you design your platforms going forward is probably the most critical element. I previously mentioned extensibility. With today's capabilities and agentic capabilities that are upcoming, vendor lock-in shouldn't be a problem unless you put all your eggs in one basket. We're being very smart with how we leverage our investment and our technology going forward. We operate with a model of fit for purpose. And we don't put square pegs in round holes. We try to do the right function for the service that we're going after at the best price.
The AI, the prompts, the data, and everything is going to have to be treated just as any corporate secrets or organizational secrets, intellectual property, and it's going to be need to be protected all the way throughout the life chain, right?
Because we can't have pure explainability end to end. We don't know exactly why a model is outputting what it's outputting. It's going to make sense to do checks on these things. And so I think it's going to make sense to do more third-party checks too. So right now, OpenAI, for example, they have their own red teaming team. and they sort of do a lot of their own safety evaluation and research. But I think it's going to make a lot of sense to have that be not purely owned by the company building the models. And there's going to be a big market, I think, for people providing that service and ultimately going in and sort of trying to come up with ways to test these models to see, how safe they are and how they behave in certain, connotations. It's a little bit like an audit of your models and sort of how they behave, how safe they are, how likely they are to maybe be deceptive or to be wrong or to hallucinate. And I think there will be a big industry around that.
If you're going to advance them at the speed of relevance, you have to push the envelope. You do have to take some risks. The challenge with this is how do we make sure we're taking responsible risks in how this technology is developed? And how do we make sure that when there are problems or when there are mistakes are made, that we're transparent about what is that mistake and how do we fix it? Great example is what happens with aircraft. Very, very advanced systems. As we develop new aircraft, new technology, sometimes there are problems. Sometimes the aircraft malfunctions, and sometimes in very catastrophic ways. And that's why you have the National Transportation Safety Board. Their sole purpose is to say, let's fully evaluate what happened here. Let's take what we learned there and apply it to every other platform that's similar to this or exactly like that. Put that technology in there to keep this from happening again. We'll need to have the same sort of mechanism for AI to make sure we have those sorts of safety controls that when a mistake is made, how do we learn from that and how do we make sure we correct systems to make sure that doesn't happen again?
We're a long way from humans not being in the loop. I mean, everyone says that phrase because it's true. Humans in the loop probably is my number one answer. Like, that's how you maintain control. That's how you make sure there's no unanticipated outcome, because there's a human and human judgment involved.
We actually built a standard-based approach to facial recognition. It wasn't the models. The models, that was the red herring of the whole evaluation. The highest amount of differential bias came from not the actual model, but it came from the cameras taking the photos going to the models. And so this is where we started developing that whole concept of, like, we don't just care about the AI we buy. We don't just care about the AI we build. We also care about how we're using that AI.
Our policy, when we serve a citizen using AI, is the ultimate decision which impacts individual or citizen of New York has to be done by a human being. We do not let robot decide welfare decisions, for example. We don't use robot to decide who gets this and who gets that, who gets prioritized. We don't do that. The human beings, the AI tool is still used as a tool to get the job done. Whether it's a productivity, speed, efficiency, accuracy, but it does not replace this human being and the accountability of government to a citizen.
AI has the potential to get it wrong, right? So what you want to do is you still want to have that structure in place that allows an individual to look at things and question what the AI may be producing. And to say our tradecraft and what we use, did AI use that tradecraft? How did they get this, right? And question it. And I think that's where the human in the loop comes in with this.
If AI is being used as the principal determination of a law enforcement action or in a denial or adjudication decision, right? A culturally negative decision, right? So if you are denying benefits, if you are denying access to services, if you are, if the model is forcing a law enforcement action to occur, you always are going to need a human in the loop. You're going to need a human to adjudicate the process because they're ultimately accountable. You're not going to be successful suing the big seven because someone couldn't get on an airplane. They're going to sue the agency. So it is in the agency's best interest to look at all those scenarios and use cases. And when you have a situation where you are denying benefits, denying access, or creating a scenario that's potentially rights or safety impacting, there should be a human in the loop to help with the process.
Well, we're not good at playing second. The U.S. is not good at playing catch up. That's one of the lessons that I would take away. So our first jump at it should be, let's not get there, right?
The United States, I believe, still leads the world in AI, although our near-peer competitors are sprinting to catch up, and in some instances have either caught up or potentially ready to move ahead of us. So I think people need to understand, where's the technology going? How is it growing? Not just here, but around the world. And what are the things the United States needs to do to utilize that to make sure we continue to protect this country and our interests and deter our adversaries?
Make it a public safety and national security concern when China is able to embed AI in autonomous weaponry and to use it to attack critical infrastructure like our financial sector by just putting in a bad hyper-manipulative bot to actually disrupt that system.
And then I think you look at things like DeepSeek, and we can argue, technologists will argue all day about whether or not that was a big breakthrough or not. But what we demonstrated is that when we try to completely cut off flows of technology, that we make people more creative, just like we would be, right? And I just think I'm in a different place in terms of how we think about managing technological surprise and collaborating with some of the people that we have to also compete with.
So I think the challenge with AI and AI adoption is striking the right balance between innovation and the need, which I believe is really important for us to out-innovate and out-compete global strategic competitors or even adversaries, China, Russia, et cetera. Balancing that need to innovate and compete with the need for safety and responsible growth and development of AI, and especially responsible and safe adoption of AI in the federal government. And you could look at those two things as being in tension, but actually think they're complementary because if we don't get the responsibility piece right, inevitably our innovation and growth will be stymied because there will be a backlash if we're not doing it in the right way.
To me, the most important thing in the world is for us not to sit back and let AI take over. We've got to be active participants in the design and implementation with the understanding of what it can do and what might be the drawbacks.
With the AI systems, giving people boundaries where they feel confident and comfortable to innovate is really, really critical. If someone thinks that they're going to make a single mistake and lose their job, it's not a great position for them to be in, and we see a lot of fear. If you can say to them, we're going to provide the boundaries for you to be able to innovate, and as long as you kind of stay within this constraint, we want you to be a little terrified of what you're seeing and have some fun with this. That's really, really critical for folks because otherwise you're going to get a huge dichotomy of very innovative and fearless, and then everybody else who's going to be left behind. But if you can start to provide people the comfort that they're not going to lose their job, and a lot of that has to do with the way that our CIOs, CTOs, et cetera, constrain the AI within environments to make sure that their data is secure and that the types of algorithms that are going to be run are going to be within bounds. And a lot of that can be done in automated fashions, the same way that we manage the rest of our security and controls.
Constraint isn't just about saying no. It's about ensuring that when we say yes, we know exactly what we're agreeing to. It's about prioritizing human agency over raw speed. But as we've seen, regulation has a cost. If we lock down innovation here, do we surrender the advantage to adversaries abroad? And worse, if we make the rules too hard to follow, do we create a world where only the biggest, wealthiest players can afford to play? That leads us to our final scenario, and maybe the most daunting one. What happens when the power of AI becomes so concentrated that governments can't control it anymore? Join us for the finale of the 4 Futures of AI: Collapse.
The FAA's mission is clear: set the global standard for safety while modernizing at full throttle. EY helps make that possible by strengthening the operational backbone where safety, data, workflows, compliance, and mission decisions come together. We modernize the systems behind the systems so technology strengthens, not disrupts, America's national airspace system. From router to runway, we optimize NAS performance, accelerate certification, embed zero-trust cybersecurity, and empower FAA's workforce with the best tools and training. The result? Zero turbulence in modernization, clearer decisions, a safer, future-ready airspace. EY, confidence in motion, supporting the FAA mission from the inside out.